A boot cracked against the leg of a wooden bench. The man sitting there hit the floor hard, palms scraping stone. Laughter rolled through the crowd above him. Someone kicked his cup and it spun away across the tiles, spilling dark wine. He did not fight back. He only reached down for his dog, a thin gray hound with 3 legs, and pulled it close. "Simple," one of the lords sneered. "Even the beast is broken." The man said nothing. He never did. His name was Tomas Vane, and he was the younger brother of the new king. In that great hall, 300 people would rather look at the walls than look at him. But one woman had traveled 300 miles just to find him. What she was about to do would silence every single laughing mouth in the room. Trust me. Stay with me on this one. Now let me tell you about that bench. It sat at the far end of the great hall, past the fire, past the long tables, past the place where the good light reached. That was where they put Tomas. Nobody said out loud that it was his seat. They didn't have to. Everyone in the Ironwood pack understood that the king's slow brother belonged in the corner, and everyone understood that you did not go near it. Tomas was a big man. Broad through the shoulders, thick in the arms, a full head taller than most of the lords who mocked him. He could have picked any one of them up and thrown him across the room, but he never raised a hand to anyone. Not once in all his 30 years. When they pushed him, he steadied himself. When they laughed, he looked at his boots. And when they got tired and wandered off, he sat back down and rubbed the ears of his 3-legged hound. The dog was named Pip. Nobody remembered where Pip came from. Only that one winter the animal turned up half frozen at the kennel gate with one back leg gone black, and the kennel master was going to put him down. Tomas took the dog in his own arms and would not let go, carried him inside his coat for a week, fed him from his own plate. And from that day on, Pip never once left Tomas's feet. Where the man went, the dog went. When the man was mocked, the dog growled low in his chest at anyone who came too close. So that was Tomas, the gentle giant in the corner and his broken little dog. Now here's the thing you have to understand about that night. It was the biggest night the Ironwood pack had seen in 100 years. Dragos Vane, Tomas's older brother, was being crowned Alpha King. The whole Highland had come to see it. Lords and their wives in fur and silver, warriors with old scars, elders who remembered the wars, 300 souls under one long roof, and every last one of them there to bend the knee to Dragos. Dragos looked the part. Tall, sharp-jawed, cold-eyed. He wore the crown well, and he knew it. He loved his brother in a quiet, distant way, the way you love something you're a little ashamed of. He never mocked Tomas himself, but he never stopped anyone else from doing it either. And in a room full of cruel men, silence from the king is the same as permission. The cruelest of them was a lord named Vas. Broad, mean, with a smile like a knife. Vas had spent the whole evening drinking and boasting because Vas wanted something. He wanted the visiting she-wolf. Her name was Alara Corvin. She had arrived that afternoon from the far north, from a pack most of these people had only heard about in stories. 300 miles she'd come over 3 mountain passes with 2 guards and a tired horse. And when she walked into that hall, the whole room turned. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. She carried herself like someone who had come a very long way for a very serious reason and would not be turned aside by anyone. Every unmarried lord in the room wanted to dance with her, Vas most of all. He'd already sent word through a servant that the first dance would be his. He considered it settled. But Alara wasn't looking at Vas. All evening, while the lords preened and the wine poured, she was doing something strange. She was searching. Her eyes moved slowly across the hall, table by table, face by face. Not the way a woman looks for a dance partner. The way a woman looks for a person she has never seen but has been told about her whole life. She passed over the handsome ones. She passed over the rich ones. She passed over Dragos on his new throne. And then near the end of the hall in the bad light past the fire, her eyes stopped. They stopped on a big, gentle man rubbing the ears of a three-legged dog, and she went very still. Nobody noticed. Why would they? Everyone was watching the throne, watching the king, waiting for the music. The musicians lifted their instruments. Dragos raised his cup and called for the first dance of his reign. The lords straightened their coats. Voss set down his drink and turned toward Alara with that knife of a smile, sure of himself, sure of everything. And Alara Corvin walked right past him. The music started up bright and grand, and she began to walk. Not toward Voss, not toward any of them. She walked down the length of that great hall, past table after table, and the whole crowd watched, confused, because she was walking away from every powerful man in the room and toward the one corner nobody ever looked at. The lords turned to follow her with their eyes. The wives leaned to whisper. Voss's smile fell right off his face. And Tomas, poor Tomas, didn't even know she was coming for him. He heard the music and he lowered his head, the way he always did, waiting to be left alone. Then a shadow fell across his boots, and Pip, the old three-legged hound, slowly rose to his feet. Tomas looked up. Alara Corvin was standing right in front of him, close enough to touch. And in a room where 300 people had spent 30 years pretending he didn't exist, this stranger was looking straight into his eyes as if he were the only man alive. She held out her hand. The whole hall went dead quiet. The music kept playing, but nobody moved. Nobody breathed. A great lord dropped his cup and it clattered on the stone, and still nobody looked away, because everyone was staring at the same impossible thing, the most sought-after woman in the Highlands, offering her hand to the simple brother in the corner. Tomas didn't understand. You could see it on his face. He looked at her hand, then at her face, then back at her hand, and his mouth worked without sound. He thought it was a trick. Of course he did. Every kind thing that had ever come near him had turned out to be a trick. "It's all right," Alara said softly, "just for him. I've come a very long way to find you, Tomas." He had never heard his name said gently by a stranger, not once in his life. His big hand was shaking when he raised it. And when his rough, three-fingered right hand, I'll tell you about those missing fingers soon, it matters more than anything. When that hand settled into hers, Pip let out a low sound that was almost a whine, almost a word, as if the old dog had been waiting for this exact moment for years. Alara drew him up, slow, gentle. Tomas rose to his full height, towering over her, this huge, frightened man being led by the hand like a child. And she walked him out, away from the corner, into the light, into the middle of the floor where the whole court could see. The lords parted. They had no choice. Voss stood frozen with rage in his face. Dragos leaned forward on his throne, and for the first time all night, the king looked truly surprised. And in the center of the hall, in front of everyone who had ever laughed at him, Alara Corvin placed the hand of the simple brother on her waist, took his other hand in hers, and began to dance. He was clumsy at first. Of course he was. He'd never danced in his life. His feet didn't know the steps. He stumbled once and his face burned red, and he tried to pull away, ashamed, ready to run back to his corner where at least the humiliation was familiar. But Alara held on. "Look at me," she whispered. "Not at them, at me. Just follow, I have you." And something in the way she said it, "I have you," reached a place in Tomas that had been locked and dark for 30 years. He stopped fighting. He let her lead. And slowly, awkwardly, then a little less awkwardly, the big gentle man began to move with her across the floor. Pip trotted along behind them, 3 legs and all, circling the pair, guarding them. The court watched in stunned silence. Some of the older women had tears in their eyes without knowing why. Something was happening here that was bigger than a dance, and everyone could feel it, even if nobody understood it yet. As they turned, Alara leaned close to his ear. "You don't remember me," she said. "You couldn't. I was small and it was dark and there was so much snow." She pulled back to look at his face. but I have spent my whole life looking for the boy who carried me down that mountain, and I finally found him." Tomas's brow furrowed, his mouth opened, and in a rough, halting voice, the voice everyone in that room had decided was the voice of a fool, he said one word: "Snow." Alara's eyes filled. "Yes," she said, "the snow you remember." The music swelled and they turned again, and for one long, perfect moment nothing bad existed in the whole world. The song ended, the dancers stopped. And here is where you'd think the trouble would start, but it didn't. Not yet, because Alara simply squeezed his hand, smiled at him, and let him go. She had a whole plan, you see. She wasn't finished, but the room was watching and the moment needed to breathe. Tomas, for his part, thought it was over. He didn't understand plans. He only understood what he could see and touch. And what he had just felt was the single kindest thing that had ever happened to him, and in his mind, kind things ended. They always ended. So he did what he always did. He bowed his big clumsy bow and he turned and he walked back to his bench in the corner, back to the bad light where he belonged, with Pip padding faithfully at his heels. He sat down. His heart was pounding, but a good pounding, a warm one. He picked up a fresh cup of water a servant had left, and he took a slow sip, and he let out a long breath. Around the hall the murmuring settled. The musicians shuffled their pages for the next song. Lords went back to their wine. The strange, beautiful moment folded up and got put away, and the great hall began, slowly, to breathe normally again. Tomas set the cup down and scratched Pip behind the ears. It's over, he told himself. But it was beautiful, he would keep it. Nobody could take a memory. He almost smiled. That's when the voice cut across the hall like a blade. "By whose right?" It was Vas. He'd stepped out into the open floor, and his face was dark red with drink and fury, and his hand was resting on the hilt of the dagger at his belt. And just like that, everything changed. Because this was no longer about a dance. This was about blood. "By whose right?" Vas said again, louder, turning slow so the whole court could hear. "Does a stranger cross this hall, shame every noble lord in it, and give the king's own coronation dance to a half-wit in the corner?" He pointed at Tomas. "That creature isn't fit to stand in this room. And you," he swung the finger to Alara, "you come here from nowhere, no house we know, and you insult the blood of Ironwood on the night of its crowning. That is a crime. Under old law, it is a crime answered in blood." A gasp went through the crowd, because Vas had said the words, old law, and old law in the Highlands was not a thing you took back. You see, what had been simple cruelty a moment ago was now something with teeth. Vas wasn't just a bully anymore. He was invoking the ancient code of the pack, the code even the king had to honor. And under that code, an insult to a noble house at a coronation could be answered by a blood challenge, to the death. This wasn't personal now, it was law. It had stopped being about one mean man and become about the whole cold machine of the pack, and that machine could crush a gentle giant like a twig. Dragos rose from his throne. "Vas," the king warned. "Sit down, you're drunk." "Am I wrong?" Vas shot back. "Is she of a known house? Name it, name her house, and I'll sit." The hall turned to Alara. "And I have to tell you, this is the moment the whole story turns on, so stay right here with me." Alara Corvin did not flinch. She stepped forward into the center of the floor, calm as still water, and she looked at Vas, and then she looked at the king, and then she looked out at the whole silent court. "My house," she said clearly, "is Corvin of the North Reach. My father is Lord Aldrich Corvin, who holds the 3 northern passes and 11,000 spears." A ripple went through the room. These were not small names. These were names that could start or end a war. "And I did not travel 300 miles through the snow," Alara went on, "to insult this hall. I came to repay it. I came to tell you all the truth about the man you've spent 30 years calling a fool." She turned and pointed. not at Tomas's face but at his right hand. His scarred, three-fingered right hand. "Ask him," she said, "how he lost those fingers." The hall was silent. Tomas curled the hand against his chest, ashamed, the way he always hid it. And before I tell you what she said next, because what she said next brought grown warriors to tears and dropped a proud lord to his knees, do me one favor. If you're still with me, if this story has its hook in you, take 1 second and hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps more than you know, and I've got the best part of this coming right up. All right. Back to that hall and that hand, and the truth 30 years buried. "Nobody here knows," Alara said, her voice carrying now sharp and clear, "because he never told you. He can't tell it right, you all made sure of that, calling him slow, laughing him into silence until he stopped trying to speak at all. So I'll tell it for him." She walked a slow circle as she spoke, and every eye followed her. 22 years ago there was a blizzard in the eastern passes, the worst in living memory. A caravan from the North Reach was caught in it, my father's caravan, and in that caravan was his youngest daughter, 4 years old, me. She let that land. The horses died. The men died. The snow buried the road, and it buried the caravan, and it was going to bury me too. My nurse wrapped me in furs and pushed me into a hollow in the rocks and told me to be quiet. And then she went to find help, and she never came back. I sat in that hollow in the dark and I waited to freeze. I was 4 years old and I was dying alone in the snow. Not a soul in that hall was breathing. And then, Alara said, and her voice cracked just once, a boy found me. A boy from the Ironwood side of the mountain out looking for a lost lamb of all things, 10 years old, alone. He heard me crying in the rocks and he could have run home, any sensible boy would have. The storm was killing grown men that night, but he didn't run home. She looked at Tomas now and the tears came free down her face. He dug me out with his bare hands. He wrapped me in his own coat. And then he picked me up and he carried me down the mountain, in the dark, in the storm. 11 miles. Someone in the crowd made a soft, broken sound. He fell 3 times, Alara said. The snow tore his coat off. His right hand froze to the rocks when he caught himself, and when he pulled it free he left the skin of 3 fingers behind. Do you understand? He gave those fingers to that mountain so that I would live, and he kept walking. He got a fever that night that burned for 2 weeks. When it broke, the boy who came out the other side was quieter, slower to find his words. Some part of that bright, brave child stayed up on the mountain in the cold. Her voice dropped. That is your fool. That is your half-wit in the corner. The bravest child in the history of this pack burned his own mind to ash carrying a stranger's daughter home. And you repaid him with a bench in the dark. The hall had gone from silent to something worse than silent. You could hear people weeping now, openly. Lords with old scars wiping their eyes. My father searched for that boy for 18 years, Alara said. All we had was a name half heard through a fever, a name I babbled when they found me, wrapped in a stranger's coat. We didn't even know which pack. We sent riders across every highland in the north. And 2 months ago, a trader mentioned a giant simpleton in the Ironwood court who was missing 3 fingers on his right hand, lost as a boy in a storm. She turned to face Tomas fully. I saddled my horse the same hour. She crossed the floor to him. She knelt down in front of the bench, this daughter of a great house, kneeling in front of the man everyone called broken, and she took his ruined hand in both of hers and pressed it to her cheek. I found you, she whispered. I finally found you. And Tomas, big, silent, gentle Tomas, looked down at the woman holding his hand, and something moved behind his eyes. A memory, maybe. A small girl crying in the rocks, snow in the dark. And he said in that slow, rough, careful voice, the longest sentence anyone in that hall had ever heard him speak. I carried the lamb, he said, and then I heard the lamb crying different. He frowned, reaching for it. It wasn't a lamb, it was you. It was me, Alara wept, laughing through the tears. It was always me. Now, you'd think that would be the end of it. You'd think Voss would crawl under a table in shame. But cruel men don't shame easy, and drunk cruel men least of all. Voss stood there with the whole room weeping around him, and instead of backing down, something in his pride snapped. A pretty story, he spat. Prove it. Any beggar can lose fingers to frost. She wants northern spears in this hall. Of course she'll dress up the fool as a hero. I say she lies. And by old law I have the right to answer her insult with steel. He drew his dagger and the ring of it echoed off the stone. I name the blood challenge, her champion against me, right now. And here's the cold thing about old law. Once the words are spoken and the blade is drawn, the king himself cannot stop it. Dragos was on his feet, but even he could only stand there jaw tight, because the law was the law and every elder in the room knew it. Alara stood up slowly. Then I name my champion, she said. You have no champion, Voss laughed. Who? One of your two frozen guards. No, said a voice. A slow, rough, careful voice. The whole hall turned, and Tomas Vane was rising from his bench. All of him. Rising and rising, big as a barn door, until he stood at his full towering height, and for the first time in 30 years there was something in his face that was not fear. Me, Tomas said, I am her champion. Pip stood beside him, hackles up, teeth bared, 3 legs planted like iron. You, Voss's face twisted, you can't even talk. You've never held a blade in your life. No, Tomas agreed simply, but I carried a girl 11 miles in the snow, and I did not put her down. He looked at Voss, and there was no hate in it, only a terrible, quiet certainty. I will not put her down now. They cleared the floor. I won't dress it up for you. Voss was a trained fighter, and Tomas had never thrown a punch in his life. By every rule that should have been a slaughter. Voss came in fast and low with the dagger, all those years of practice behind it, aiming to end it quick and cruel. But here is the thing about a man who has spent 30 years absorbing blows and never once striking back. He knows how to take a hit, and he is not afraid of pain. Pain was the one friend that never left him. The blade opened a long red line across Tomas's forearm. He didn't even look at it. He caught Voss's wrist in that huge 3-fingered hand, the hand the mountain had made, and he held on. Just like he'd held on to a freezing child. Just like he'd held on to a dying dog. He held on, and Voss twisted and swore and stabbed at him with his free hand, and Tomas took those blows too, on his shoulder, on his ribs, and he did not let go. Drop it, Tomas said quietly. Voss screamed and fought. Tomas closed his grip. There was a sound like green wood cracking, and the dagger fell and rang on the stone, and Voss dropped to his knees with his ruined wrist held tight against him, gasping. And Tomas let him go. That was the thing that broke the whole room open. He let him go. He stood over the man who had spent years humiliating him, the man who had just tried to open his throat, and Tomas Vane simply stepped back and lowered his bleeding arm and would not strike a beaten man. He turned away from Voss as though he were already forgotten, and he walked back to Alara, and he stood in front of her like a wall between her and the world. For a moment nobody moved. Then from the throne came the sound of a crown being set down on stone. Dragos, the Alpha King, walked down off his dais. He crossed the floor to his brother. And in front of the entire court, the king reached out and laid his hand on Tomas's bleeding arm, and his own voice was thick. Dragos said, 30 years I let them. I told myself you didn't understand, that it didn't touch you. He shook his head. I was the fool, not you, never you. And then the Alpha King did a thing no one had ever seen an Alpha King do. He bowed his head to his younger brother right there in the hall, and the whole court, 300 souls, went down after him like a wave, lords, warriors, elders, wives, every last one of them bending the knee to the simple brother in the corner. Even Vas, weeping on the floor, bowed his head. Everyone knelt. Only Alara stayed standing at Tomas's side, where she meant to stay for the rest of her life. Now, before I close this out, let me tell you what happened after, because it matters. Because a story like this shouldn't end at the loud part. It should end at the quiet part. They tended Tomas's arm that night, and the cut healed clean into a thin white scar he would carry alongside the old ones. Vas was stripped of his lands by the king's word and sent from the highland in disgrace, and no one ever spoke his name in that hall again. And that far bench in the corner in the bad light past the fire, they took it out. Dragos ordered it burned. In its place at the head of the hall near the throne, they set a proper chair, and beside it a smaller one, and beside that a warm rug on the stone. The rug was for Pip. The old three-legged hound got the best spot by the fire for the rest of his days, and he took it as his due, and no one ever kicked his master's cup again. Alara Corvin did not go home, or rather, she made a new home. She and Tomas were bonded before the next full moon, mate to mate, and I have watched a lot of weddings in my telling of these old Highland stories, and I have never told one where the bride wept harder walking toward the groom. Her father, Lord Aldrich, came south with 100 riders to meet the man who had carried his daughter down a mountain 22 years before. The old lord climbed down off his horse, looked up at the giant who dwarfed him, and could not say a single word. He just gripped Tomas's ruined hand in both of his and held it, the same way his daughter had, and the two of them stood like that a long while, and that was all the speech either of them needed. Tomas never became a clever man. Let me be honest with you about that, because the truth is better than a fairy tale. His words always came slow. He still lost the thread sometimes. The mountain had taken what it took, and it never gave it back. But here is what the mountain could not take, what 30 years of cruelty could not take, what nobody had ever bothered to look for behind that silence. The biggest, gentlest, bravest heart in the whole Carpathian Highland. It had been sitting in the corner the entire time. All it took was one person willing to walk the length of the hall and hold out a hand. And Alara understood something the whole court had missed for 30 years. Being clever is common. Highland lords are thick with clever men, and half of them are snakes. But a heart that will carry a stranger's child 11 miles through a killing storm and give up its own fingers and never once ask for thanks, that is the rarest thing in this world. That is the thing worth crossing 3 mountain passes to find. She'd known it since she was 4 years old, freezing in the dark, when a pair of huge arms lifted her up and a rough young voice said, "I have you. Don't be afraid. I have you." She spent 18 years looking for the owner of those arms. And on the night of a king's crowning in a silent hall past the fire in the bad light where nobody ever looked, she finally found him rubbing the ears of a broken little dog. She walked past every powerful man in the room. She held out her hand. And this time, it was her turn to say it. "I have you now, Tomas Vane, and I will never ever put you down."